In fact, it took me a while actually. When I first heard Frank Zappa, I was offended because that's what I thought I needed to be. But then when I really learned about him and behind the music, that's kind of what turned me around on that. But
Yeah.
yeah, my son is way too young for that. But something that does skirt the edge there, and actually that we do both enjoy. We became humongous fans of Hamilton. And so, even though, I moved out of New York a long time ago, and with that, I'm not exposed to as much Broadway stuff as I felt like I was growing up. But, Hamilton did come here to my house and I became a complete American, history, like Revolutionary War history buff because of it. And we will listen to it. And there's some inappropriate words, which
Yes.
my son, he's at that age where it's funny and he's like, oh my God, they said that, it's fine. He understands. And even some of the things that they're singing about, he, I think, knows a couple, but doesn't know
Yeah.
all of them yet.
Mhm.
But we both, we definitely enjoy that together.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Set Listing Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson. We're getting off the Springsteen bandwagon today, though he will come up because he always does. And we are on the Star Trek Enterprise. Maybe my guest has a Starfleet t-shirt on. Guest, Adeena Mignogna,
Mignogna.
I'm trying to get it, is joining me. Adeena, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is a connection. We gotten together and I had said, hey, if you want to talk music, I'd love to have you on the podcast. And I also want to talk about your book. And you were kind enough to say yes. So thank you so much for being here. Start us off with your elevator pitch. Tell us a little about yourself.
Well, as you mentioned, I'm a writer. I'm a science fiction writer, but more than that, I'm an engineer with a background in physics, but I work in the space industry. That's what I've done for the last about 25 years. And yeah, my life is mostly about space and science fiction, but I do love music. Music has always been a part of my life as well. Although I think since I became a parent, not as big a part. I have a keyboard sitting there that doesn't get a lot of use.
That is not an unusual statement. I did not see Bruce Springsteen live till 2002 because I moved to Dallas in '86, and during the '90s, anytime he came like on the Tom Joad tour or the reunion tour, I had family crap to do, and I didn't get to go. So yes, it is because getting a babysitter, lining up times to go see the local band at the bar is just a little tougher to do than it is. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally get that. So I had a guest recently on, Heather, who is interested in space law. So
interesting.
yes, she says that is a up and coming field, and she was fascinated by it, and she's actually doing a lot of work on space law. Talk to me a little bit more about your day gig. Tell me a little bit about what you're doing.
Sure. So most of the time that I've spent in the space industry, I've worked on what we call ground software, command and control software. So if you can picture, if you see on TV like a NASA control center where you see a room full of people, they're all in front of computers and they're staring at screens. Well, the stuff that they're staring at the screen, that kind of software that they're using to talk to the satellites, that is mostly what I've done over the years. Not exclusively. I've in addition to software, I've done what we call systems engineering, which is a more broader aspect of putting a satellite together. And that's actually what I am currently doing right now. I'm the lead systems engineer of a satellite project that should launch in a few years to do commercial resurfacing missions. My company, I work for Northrop Grumman, actually. And over the last few years, we've had a couple missions that went out and connected to an existing satellite to extend its life. And so I'm now working on missions like that to do similar things, but in a new, unique, more interesting way. So yes, that's what I do by day.
Well, because I always get a kick out of this. One of the things I loved, and I'm sure it was totally wrong, but in the TV show Medium,
Mhm,
the spouse, the guy, played a engineer,
mhm.
and I always love the joke, it's not rocket science. And you go, yes, that is what I do. It is rocket science. That is what I do. So I think that's fascinating that because it's all computers and it's math and
Mhm.
and it is um, the minutia of every little step that allows this miraculous thing to happen.
Yes, it is, but it's actually funny because within the industry, I don't consider myself really a rocket scientist
Right.
because I don't actually work on rockets. I work on satellites.
Yes.
But then what's really funny is other friends of mine who I consider them rocket scientists, they don't consider
Okay.
themselves rocket scientists because several of my friends do work on the more propulsive elements of a satellite. A lot of satellites have thrusters on them. And so my friends who work on that, I call them the rocket scientists. And they're like, nope, still, we don't work on rockets. And then my friends who work on the rockets, unless they're the ones actually working on the rocket fuel, they also don't consider themselves rocket scientists.
It's one of those things where I remember when I was working for a company and we implemented SAP,
Mhm,
and it was very quickly, it's SAP, it's not SAP.
mhm,
That is the correct term. And once you get used to that, I go back to when I was in high school, I worked at Howard Johnson's as a waiter, and
mhm.
they quickly, it is not a Coke, it is a cola. Words
Yep.
matter. And
Yes.
so I really do. I, I am not, I am slightly embarrassed that I made the rocket scientist joke, but I also get that I
Mhm.
understand that if you're in that world, it's like, no, 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 that's not, like, uh, I had a good friend who's an attorney and he played Trivial Pursuit with a bunch of other attorneys. And
Mhm.
it was like, why did Al Capone go to jail?
Mhm.
And, and he's like, tax evasion. No, tax fraud.
Well, words matter. And it was
Yeah.
actually funny because I do at my day job, I do pay attention to how we use language because people think it is all math and numbers. And really so much of it is person to person communication and in making sure that we are adequately communicating because if we mess up, if we aren't speaking the same language, if we mess up, there can be some serious consequences. So just the other day, and because I'm known for being particular in my use of language at work, someone else actually just pointed out my use of we have suppliers, we have vendors, we have subcontractors, and I've been using the term vendor very loosely. And he called me out on that and saying, no, 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 it's a supplier, not a vendor. And in the context that he was talking about, he was correct. But yeah, it really communication and those language skills are very important. And when I look to hire new engineers, I do look for those kinds of skills as well. Those really important.
Yeah, like Adina, one of the things early when I was uh, one of the first jobs I had when I quit college was I was a dispatcher for a trucking industry,
Mhm,
and you learned very quickly to say correct, not right,
mhm,
because
yes.
right means a direction
Mhm,
versus, correct. And the you don't you we try not to say they are a good agent, but because then the word but or however wipes out everything you did. And so like the military teaches you to say, not use those words because it can be very confusing. There are consumers and clients often in especially in industry that is a computer, where consumers are using the software you design and your clients buy the software so that their customers, the consumers could use. So we had to use that language.
Absolutely. It's funny you mentioned the right thing, because I've a couple children, and my youngest son, he's 3, and he is learning the difference between left and right. And so when we're talking through that, I very consciously, when I want to say, yep, that was correct, I say correct. I don't say he was right. I say he was correct, so I don't confuse him.
Yes.
After he just, he said, this is my left foot. I'm like, yes, that is correct. So, because if I said, yes, that is right, I just don't want to confuse him, but yes.
Yes, it is. It becomes an Abbott and Costello, right? No, right. I thought you said it was like, no,
exactly.
Yes, it is. Exactly. That is so funny. So I did not warn you beforehand that we would go off on tangents, but
That's
as
okay.
you can see, yes, I love this. I always like to start at the beginning. So talk to me growing up. Where did you grow up, and what kind of music did your family listen to?
Sure. So I'm a child of the 80s. I was born in 74. So I grew up basically in the 80s on Long Island. And my family was not a super, super musical family, but it was there. And I feel like there's always a point in time where you have a musical discovery with your family. So back in the day, my parents had albums, and there was like a chest full of albums. And at some point I was old enough to learn how to take an album out, load it up in the record player. And by doing this, you discover your parents' music. And I think then you start to discover your own. And so I had my mother's music, which was a lot of Broadway shows, and some of the older ones, Oklahoma, South Pacific, I can barely say that, shows like that. And then my dad, which had a lot of classical music. He was also of the generation, Buddy Holly, that kind of music. And then between the two of them, I think they accumulated together music like Billy Joel. And I think anyone growing up on Long Island in the 80s, there are certain, musicians, artists that they're part of the culture. Billy Joel was one of them. I think even Bruce Springsteen was part of that. There are a whole set that everyone would recognize. And I definitely grew up with all of that, and had that, discovery journey, which in thinking about preparing for this show, I was thinking about that and thinking how my kids don't have the same kind of experience, because my CD collection, I don't even have a record collection. I lost my record collection years ago, and I don't have a cassette collection anymore, but my CD collection has been packed away in boxes for years. So it's really everything that we're doing digitally, which is not the same experience that I had growing up. And it's kind of, I don't know if it's better or worse. It's certainly different.
Well, Adeena, I agree with you. There was another podcast, Skip and Josh podcast, where they said, name your 7 favorite album covers. And I found, Herb Albert and the Tijuana Brass, Whipped Cream and Other Delights. And it's got this picture of a girl that's got whipped cream covering her body. And I said, young Jesse Jackson knew there was something about that album cover that spoke to him, in ways. It is, we lose that going through. I think of the Almost Famous, scene where she gives him, his older sister gives him albums, and he's flipping through that. And we also, and I'm going to sound like a grumpy old man, and I love the fact that I can go to E Street Radio and hear Bruce Springsteen. Right now they've got, they're doing a Rolling Stones channel. There is a Beatles channel. There's, during the summer they had a Beach Boys channel. You can do the 70s, you can do 80s, you can do 90s. And that's great to be able to specialized, but there was something really beautiful about having an AM radio, or in your case, an FM radio,
Mhm.
where you weren't sure what you're going to get. You may get hip
Right.
hop, you may get a pop song, you may get, a little bit of heavier rock song. And just, there was a top 40 that was a diversity
Mhm.
that I don't think we get now.
No, we definitely don't. I remember getting my first radio that was mine. I think it was the summer I turned 8. And I think it was a gift from one of my grandmothers. And the radio station that I tuned to initially, I think it started that summer, was Z100. It was like from the top of the Empire State Building. It was what they said. And they played a combination of current rock at the time and some classic rock-ish. And so, I mean, I have memories of them playing the Eurythmics, Steve Miller Band, which also oddly, I have the same memories of those same songs, not just coming through the radio, but those are the years that we went to the roller rink too. And I spent a lot of time those summers at the roller rink. And yeah, I remember roller skating to, Sweet Dreams by the Eurythmics and Abracadabra by Steve Miller Band, and that group of songs, and that, all of that stuff permeated my childhood. And yeah. And right, you didn't know what you were going to get. It wasn't up to you. It was what it was.
Yeah.
With commercials in between.
Exactly. Yes. I love that. So when you started going into high school, where did your musical taste roll to?
Oh, wow. So between junior high and high school, that kind of time period, actually very heavy metal-ish.
Okay.
I became a pretty significant Iron Maiden fan. And to this day, they are one of the bands that I still love, although I didn't follow them, throughout their whole journey after Seventh Son of a Seventh Son.
Okay.
So I was there for, with, Peace of Mind I was a little too young, but I kind of caught up to that. But Power Slave, Somewhere in Time, Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, that group has always stayed with me my entire life. And when you mentioned, album art a few minutes ago, part of it was the album art. My room was plastered with Iron Maiden posters too. And it's kind of funny. One of the reasons is there was, like, to me, a strong science fiction tie-in with the band, their lyrics, their art. And what I've learned about them since, and some of the, some of the stuff behind the songs is, yep, there is actually some science fiction tie-in. So it kind of makes some sense. But then somewhere in high school, though, I did, and it was mostly because some friends introduced me to, I became more interested in the progressive rock from the early 70s, like Yes, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, King Crimson, that stuff. And that followed me into college, including Frank Zappa too. Frank Zappa became a big part of that. And he was one of the few artists where it really even just wasn't about the music, but his personality.
Yeah.
It was one of the things that attracted me to the music. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I remember loving Kansas and Styx,
Mm-hmm.
in
Yes.
the 70s, same kind of science
Mm-hmm.
fiction thing, Journey, Boston having the cover of that. Always was a big science fiction fan. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about that, because I remember, like, often, I was born in 59, so I graduated high school in 77. So the middle 70s, where Lost in Space and Star
Mm-hmm.
Trek were, on syndication, and trying to, like, I could not have, one of the fantasies I had as a kid was to be rich enough that you could go buy a projector and you could buy all the Star Trek film reels so that you could watch a Star Trek episode
Awesome.
anytime.
Mm-hmm.
No idea if you tried to go back and tell 10-year-old Jesse that, no, you can watch Star Trek anytime you want. There's
Yep.
this magical device. You just pull it up and you watch it, and, like, no, that's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Big loved Isaac Asimov.
Mm-hmm.
I just, Arthur C. Clarke, Ray Bradbury, but especially Isaac Asimov and Robert Heinlein. Just I found the what Heinlein called the the juvenile novels and Asimov's
Mhm.
collection of short stories, and where his introductions were sometimes just as entertaining as the short stories.
Yes.
So I take it you talk to me a little about your growing up in the science fiction world.
Yeah. So I think, my dad was one of the catalysts there just because he was a fan. And so it was there. So we had, there were Isaac Asimov novels or the collections of short stories just there. And then, yes, Star Trek was just kind of a constant presence in the background. And it just kind of resonated with me, especially when Star Trek The Next Generation came on air. For the first season, I wouldn't have considered myself a Trekkie then, but I did watch every single episode in its original airing that first season, except for one, the one where Tasha Yar died. We went out to dinner. We never went out to dinner. We rarely went out to
Right.
dinner, but we went out to dinner that night because my mother had hurt her hand. So we went out to dinner, and I missed that in its original showing. But between the first and second season is when I some kind of switch went off in my brain, and that's when I became a Trekkie, and I've been a diehard Trekkie every day since. I mean, as you can see, I'm just randomly lounging around in like a Star Trek
Yes.
t-shirt right here. That was just completely random, but not unexpected.
Well, next to me on my little computer is here's my little Star Trek glasses from the
Nice.
movie. Yeah, and so I have a old school communicator at my desk at work that routinely I will flip up and hear it chirps.
Awesome.
Um, in fact, I was doing a podcast earlier, and someone texted me, and my text notification is the original communicator chirp. And
Nice.
so, and the guy was like, "Oh, Star Trek. Do we want to talk about Star Trek for a few minutes?" I'm like, "Oh, we can." So in fact, my wife found this.
Oh,
It's
that's wonderful.
yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah, I I I just was fascinated by, and you talked about loving Frank Zappa. I I adored Isaac Asimov's personality.
Mhm.
He, and whether he was that way or not, but the persona he created in those introductions and of the
Mhm.
short stories and his autobiography just made me someone that this is somebody I would want to hang with. That
Yeah.
this is someone, often when you do that fantasy game, like, okay, anyone alive and dead, alive or dead, dinner party, who would you want? And I'm like, oh, I would want Asimov. I would love to just have Isaac just tell stories and hold court.
Yeah, he was just so prolific. So I think he was who he was. I don't think that, the persona that we saw, I think that was really genuinely him. I don't think
Yeah, did you?
he knew, or I don't think he could be another way. And I get that from just how much he wrote, not just science fiction, but just wrote. He wrote letters. I mean, I think one of the books I have on the shelf is a collection of his letters to, fan mail letters and
Yes.
stuff. So I think he was just him. I did happen to see him at a convention in New York City a couple of years before he passed. And unfortunately, even though I was a fan of his, I don't think I appreciated, I was young, I was a teenager. So
Yeah.
I don't think I really appreciated the moment when I was in front of him. And I wish
Right.
I had, going back years to when I was a kid and teenager, I wish I had appreciated those kinds of things, much more, because yeah, he was a amazing brain.
I have one fun moment. He was on a talk show here in Dallas, and I got into the talk show. They were, open
Mhm.
calls, and I was able to tell him. I think it was Nemesis was the standalone novel, but he had just done a standalone novel, and I told him that I said I really enjoyed the novel. Not that I didn't like all the foundation books or the
Mhm.
robot books, but it was kind of fun just to pick up a book that was standalone.
Mhm.
And he said, well, I will tell you, I enjoyed writing a standalone novel. It was a lot of fun just to write that. And I was like, oh, okay, good. I got that. And so I have that. I don't have a camera or picture of us
Mhm.
together, but I have that memory of getting to talk to him over the radio, in the phone call. And so, yeah, just truly, um, one of the icons of my youth,
Hmm.
and
Absolutely.
continue. And I am very excited about Foundation,
Hmm.
coming up. I'm hoping that it's going to be good,
Yes.
and so and I am tempted to go back and reread the Foundation, especially the original trilogy. So just to get, but then part of me is like, no, let's just see what they do where I won't hold
Hmm.
it against there.
I struggle with the whole concept of rereading because there's just
Yeah.
so much new stuff I haven't read yet. And it's all a matter of just there's so much, there's finite amounts of time. And do I want to
Yes,
reread something or do I want to do something new? And that's a constant struggle.
it is that. And there is, a few years ago, I took time, and it's not science fiction, but Lawrence Block is one of my favorite mystery writers. And he has a series of novels all about Matthew Scudder, who is a private detective that ends
Hmm.
up becoming an alcoholic. And there's this whole journey, and the original first 4 or 5 novels weren't serialized, but then as he got further, he self-contained novels, but a continuing story. And I read all of them at one time
Hmm.
and enjoyed the heck out of it, though I did feel a little guilty that there's all this new books out there that are going
Hmm.
like, but I was like, no, 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 I'm thinking this is, kind of what to do. um I take it there, I had interest in science fiction, but I never had the science bug.
Hmm.
I was not very good at science. I was a horrible speller. So when I was trying to take biology in college, I didn't understand any of the words they were saying about
Hmm.
all that, and I couldn't read them and understand them. And so I tend to be more. I didn't know this at the time, but that's how I became a podcaster. Is I love stories, and I love writing, and I love, telling stories. But you had the science bug, I guess.
Yep. Science and engineering. And I'd say I'm more of an engineer than a pure scientist. And that's because, I went and got a 4-year degree in school and then went out into industry as opposed to going on for a PhD and to do all those like research sciencey things. But yeah, I've always been, since I was little, always been attuned, is that the word, to science and engineering and technology. Again, a lot of this, like a lot of things come from my dad. My dad was an engineer. And I think just because I was around it and then I had a proclivity to it, so it just kind of fed on itself. So yeah, with the exception of 1 year when I thought I was going to be a musician, because I think everyone goes through that phase for 1 year. Yes, I was always going to do something science or technology related.
What kind of engineering degree?
So, well, actually, my degrees are in physics and astronomy. So
Okay.
I went to the University of Maryland where you could do multiple degrees at the same time. And
Okay.
because there was a lot of overlap in the math and some of the physics background. So I did astronomy and physics. And then several years later, which is actually only a few years ago from right now, I did a master's in computer science.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I was originally going to go for aerospace engineering, but the time that I was starting college, the industry hadn't quite recovered from the Challenger disaster.
Okay.
We'd started launching again. The shuttle was flying, but things were not. So I was very, very nervous that if I go major in aerospace, that I'm going to get locked into something very specific. And well, what happens if the industry doesn't do well?
Mhm.
To me, the worst thing, as much as I like airplanes, the aero side is kind of cool. I'm a
Yeah.
space person. I'm not
Right.
an aero person. I'm a space person. So my high school physics professor, he had degrees, both undergraduate and graduate in physics, and he had done all kinds of things during the course of his life. So I looked at that and I was like, okay, so if I major in physics, I'm not locking myself into anything. I could go to graduate school in anything, or I could do so many different things. And that was very appealing. And I got lucky in two big respects. Is one, I went to the University of Maryland, which was a great school for physics. I had no idea at the time. And two, I liked it
Yeah.
because physics is not an easy major, and if you don't like it, you're not getting through.
Yeah. Yeah. I had friends who were engineering majors, and and they used to always joke, and they knew they were being sarcastic, but um what would we do if we were majoring in business? What would we do
Mhm.
with all that free time we have? you know, um, I, for you're reminding me something. So I had scored really high in my PSAT on mathematics.
Mhm.
And so I had one of my favorite teachers that I was lucky enough to go back and see probably about 10 years ago. She had retired, then she came back, and
Mhm.
I went back to my high school and got to see Mrs. Jacobs and told her that, all those Oprah stories about a teacher that changed your life. I
Mhm.
said, you were that to me. You made me feel special, and I love that. And so she had said, wow, you seem to have an aptitude for math. You should go into computing science, because
Mhm.
then you get to play with computers and not just do math. And so I did. I went to McNeese State, and I signed up for computer science. But back then we were still doing keyboards and the punch cards,
Oh,
and
wow.
I
Yep.
and I was a lousy typist. And so I would do all my programming and then run through errors, kick it out, kick it out. And just after a while, like, I cannot stand this crap. No,
Mhm.
I've got to change something else. And I wonder if it's just been like 2 years later, where things were on a screen where you could see,
Mhm.
would I have stuck with that and would have had a totally different career? So I don't
Right.
know. That's interesting.
Yeah, and I tell people too, because when I was in college, that was still before we had this explosion of discovering all the exoplanets that are out there. In fact, I had professors in college that didn't believe that planets around other stars was really a thing, let alone as common as we know it is now. Had it been, I think again, a couple years later, and I might have gone to graduate school to really do astronomy and study that, because
Right.
I loved everything about the exoplanets and studying that. But yeah, I was just kind of couple years off.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, do talk about your time you wanted to be a musician, since this is a music podcast, though we're going to get back to more Star Trek
Sure.
and science discussions. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I don't know what it was. I think probably just, the age, but seventh, eighth grade, around then, I decided I wanted to play guitar. And that wasn't my first instrument. I did clarinet when I was in elementary school, and then I did saxophone in junior high school. So yeah, I got the guitar bug. Oh, and I took piano lessons for a couple years at home too. And yep, I was gonna be a rock star with that guitar. I was gonna study music, or I was going to play keyboards. And Def Leppard didn't have a keyboardist, so they needed a female keyboardist. So I was gonna be
Absolutely.
that. So yeah, so there was a year that I was obsessed with that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it lasted a year. Although I still, after I came back to my science and engineering and my reality, I mean, I played still for a while, never well.
Yeah.
I never stuck with one instrument long enough to actually like really get good. And I think one of my biggest regrets about high school, which I came to realize like in my senior year, was when I went from junior high to high school, I stopped playing an instrument in school. I mean, I still took some piano lessons at home. I still took guitar lessons, but I'd stopped playing saxophone. And come my senior year, really all my friends were either in band or orchestra. And
Hmm.
so I was kind of like left out.
Yeah.
Uh, I had my eighth period free, the last period of the day free. And my best friend at the time, she was in orchestra and she was the first viola chair. And there were like five violaists and 30 violinists. And I was hanging around orchestra anyway. And so I asked, can I join, even though I don't know how to play any of these instruments? And the orchestra director was like, well, yes, but you have to choose viola. You can't choose violin, and your friend has to help you catch up. And I knew how to read music, so I wasn't 100% starting from scratch. I had a little calluses on my fingers, so but it was still terrible. I didn't practice well, anywhere near as much as I should have been, but it was kind of fun. Um, but yeah, so there was always something like that. And then when I went to college, I played a little saxophone again, but it was terrible. I didn't
Hmm.
practice enough. I had a terrible instrument because I had a rented saxophone, and
Okay.
rented instruments like that are the worst. I was taking, in addition to, so I was in what we called, it was a jazz lab band. So for 1 credit, you're in this band, and we were doing jazz, and I was able to take some lessons from our instructor on the side. because again, most of the people in Jazz Lab Band, these were people who had been playing for years and years, and many of them were music majors. So I was just kind of like just the random person who didn't know how to play very well. And I remember at one point I was struggling, and he says, "Here, let me test this." And he took my instrument, and he couldn't get it to make a good sound.
Yeah.
And that was when I realized, okay, yes, a lot of it is me, but not completely. And that was one of the reasons why I felt like I wasn't getting better, is because the instrument was just terrible. And I think that was when I was done with that.
Just think, if you had stuck with it and had a better
Mhm.
instrument, after Clarence Clement died, Bruce could have been saying, you know what we really need? I need a female saxophone player that's into physics and astronomy.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
that's awesome. The let's talk a little bit about your book. So
Sure.
first, you've it sounds like you've enjoyed science fiction all your life and everything.
Mhm.
So what a lot of people go, oh, I should write a book.
Mhm.
And I don't, one of the best advice I've heard once, someone, and I wish I could remember which writer, but someone said, if you're serious about being a writer, you need to write X amount of times per day. And
Mhm.
if you can't write that, then you should write down what are the things that are stopping you from writing that much a day. And you'll very quickly learn that you're just kidding yourselves, that there is time to write if you want to. So talk about writing and when did you get the bug, and let's just go through that process.
Oh, sure. Well, I've had the bug for a very, very long time, definitely at least since college, but possibly even earlier. I took like creative writing in high school and college. And so somewhere there, I had the bug, but it wasn't to write a book, actually. It was to write short stories. That really, my favorite Asimov are all of his short stories. And that is what has inspired me more than anything else. And so for the longest time, it was all about short stories. I'm going to write short stories. I'm going to get into, Asimov's science fiction magazine and all of those. And I have started a lot of short stories. I've only finished a handful of them. I did sell one once several years ago, although I think I was still, for a little while, I was using a pen name. And yeah, so I sold one, but there's a month or a yearly, it's a contest officially called NaNoWriMo.
Okay.
Stands for National Novel Writing Month, and it's every November. And I don't remember what year it started, like maybe 2004, 2005. I found out about it in 2009. And the whole idea is to write a 50,000 word novel in a month. So it's a contest, but it's a contest against yourself. You're just challenging yourself. So I did it in 2009. It was the worst piece of crud I've ever written. But ever since then, most years, more than not, I have participated in this. And even throughout, I hadn't really planned on finishing a book. But this one that I started in 2012, I put it away for a few years, worked on some other things, and then came back to it. And it just grew on me and became what is now Crazy Foolish Robots. And more than that, what it became was Crazy Foolish Robots is now the first in a planned series of 4 books from that original thing I did in 2012. And I'm madly working on book 2 right now. And I agree with that whole statement of, if this is important to you, you will find the time.
Yeah.
I have a full-time job. I'm married. I have kids. A couple years ago, I got my master's degree. I've got a freaking full life, and yet I find the time to write, because to me, I have to.
Yeah.
I just have to.
Yeah. I've participated in NAPOD, NAPA Pod Month. The same thing. The idea is to do a podcast every day for the month of November. To and they stole this from the novel. They flat say, this is the idea, is for you to try to do a podcast every day for the month of November to try to see what creative you'll come with and do that. That's great. So you're right ahead, skipping ahead. I'm not doing a trilogy. Because I always think of Piers Anthony making a joke. Originally, the Xanth was supposed to be a trilogy, and then it ended up being forever. So you have a theory, the story you want to tell.
Yeah, and why it's 4 instead of 3, I don't know. Just that's when I realized it wasn't just going to be one, and that was mostly because, again, I like the short forms better. And this is actually a fairly short novel. It's about 40. The first one is 47,000 words, and each one is going to be about 50. Is my target, which, when I realized that one of my favorite novels ever, which is Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe, it was like 46,000 and something. I almost thought it was going to be funny that if I to match that word count. So I was actually thinking about trying to do that, but then I gave up on that because that would have been a little artificial, and I didn't really want to do that. But yeah, so I like that form. So once I realized it wasn't going to be just one really long book, and just started, okay, well, what's the plot of one, or what's the main thing in one? Just 4 came out. Four worked for this.
So give me the blurb on the back of the book for my listeners.
Yes. So Crazy Foolish Robots. It's a humorous science fiction novel about Ruby Palmer. She's 19 and she lives on a space station in the asteroid belt. She wants to get out. She wants to move on with her life. And unfortunately, it doesn't go the way she wants when she's kidnapped by a race of alien robots.
Okay.
And she doesn't like robots, at least not at first, but she goes on to help them, becomes friends, and the rest you got to read about.
That sounds great. That sounds wonderful. Absolutely. And like I said, I'll include a link to the Amazon link so that people can look into it. What current or past science fiction series? We've already talked about Star Trek. Are you enjoying Lower Decks? Did you enjoy Picard? I mean, the other Star Discovery, are you enjoying modern Trek?
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Picard is so amazing. I'm loving it all. I really am. Okay, yes, not every moment is perfect. That's always going to be true. But in general, Picard, I'm just so happy to see him back. I was so happy. There was an episode, again, trying not to, well, it's been out for long enough.
So
it shouldn't be a spoiler. Yes. But there was one episode with Riker and Troy.
Yes.
Oh, it felt like coming home.
It did.
It was just so wonderful. So I've actually watched that episode 3 or 4 times already because I just loved it so much.
Yeah.
But I'm enjoying Discovery there's so many new things they're doing, but the way they tied it in with the old without destroying the old was wonderful. I thought it did a lot of honor to the original series, but then they were able to take it in their new direction. That was fantastic. And Lower Decks is just fun.
It just truly is.
It's just fun.
It just is. So it doesn't take it serious, but it and I love the premise, right? That this is all the adventures that are happening off-sign, and there's that great Babylon 5 episode. And I'm drawing a blank on where there's this huge space battle happening over, but J. Michael Straczynski focused on the 2 janitors, right? And so I get that feeling of that and do that. What are other science fiction or fantasy shows that you've enjoyed?
Wow, a lot. So The Expanse is a big one. Although The Expanse, I'm not completely up to date on it, and I had a love-hate relationship with The Expanse because right before it came out, the writing project I was working on also took place on the asteroid Ceres. It was a space station there. And so that kind of just killed my motivation to do it, even though what I was writing was different and it shouldn't have, it just did.
Sure.
So I have a love-hate relationship with The Expanse. It's great, but It was very.
I've gone through the first two seasons and I
Mhm,
need to start the third. Um, so I personally, because I grew up, like I said, I was born in 59, graduated high school 77. The Apollo missions
mhm,
was my jam. I mean, I remember watching the moon mission. I bought Matt Mason astronaut. I bought Apollo, you know, Saturn rocket thing. So for all mankind, just touches everything that I
mhm.
want in that series. So you probably would go, it's filled with crap, Jesse. They do everything. I have a friend, and then I'll let you answer. I have a friend who served 2 tours on a submarine.
Mhm,
And he says, I can't watch a submarine movie
mhm.
because there's just too many things they're doing wrong.
Yeah.
He says, it takes me out of the series totally. So you may have similar problems with things set in, you know, in engineering firms or, you know, on ground control.
Yeah, and it depends on the movie. It depends on how far into the future it is. You know, the further in the future, the more liberties you can take. But I definitely think, you know, you really they really do need to have some good grounding in current stuff. Though, you know, and I get taken out randomly with details. And I'm probably the most forgiving person I know with the with this stuff. Like, again, I have friends who they will get all upset when there's sound in space, and I'm like, oh come on, it's a movie. It'd be boring if there was no sound in space, right? But the thing that brought me out, the one that really gets me, and it irks me every time I think about it or hear it, is so there was that movie, and it wasn't even like really a true space science fiction movie. It was just a movie, but Enemy of the State with Will Wheaton. Um, not well, I'm sorry, Will Wheaton with
Yeah.
Will Smith.
Yes.
My bad. Uh, so there's a scene where they're in a mission control center and they're talking about moving this satellite that is, I think the line they actually use, it's like hovering 200 miles over Washington, D.C., but they called it a geosynchronous satellite hovering 200 miles over Washington, D.C. That's a contradiction of terms. And that just irked me because it was so jarring. It was so wrong. It was so easy to fix if they had anyone remotely in the industry looking at the script. And it could have easily been fixed just by just take the word geosynchronous out. I can deal with the whole concept of hovering, you know, saying a satellite is hovering over 200 miles, even though that's not quite right. I can let that go. But the fact that they completely contradicted themselves right in that line and they could have so easily had avoided it, that gets me.
Yeah. So I spent some time um, selling car insurance. I worked at an auto insurance agency, and I was a sales rep over the phone. So um, people, you know, call in to get, you know, quotes and everything. And um, so we're at um, the oh, why am I drawing a blank on the Michael Douglas um, the where the crazy lady, you know, dangerous liaisons, or no, not dangerous liaisons. Now I'm going to have to look this up real quick and make a note to do this up. And
I'm
so
afraid to
Glenn
guess because you
Close.
said crazy. Like, oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, Glenn Close. And yeah, you know, the what is Glenn Close? The Fatal Attraction. That was it.
Oh,
Fatal
okay, okay,
Attraction. Okay.
okay.
So there was a scene where um, they destroy Michael Douglas's wife's car. They,
Mm-hmm.
you know, they vandalized it, and then later in the movie, um, she gets in a wreck.
Mm-hmm.
And my thought was, wow, their insurance is going to get canceled with two claims that happened that close to each other. Because I couldn't turn off my real
Mm-hmm.
world, you
Right.
know, and so yes, I can imagine, like, no, that word doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's very good.
But there are
Um,
enough movies that do enough right
right.
that, and so if they get a little bit wrong, I'm not, I don't get
Yeah.
too upset. Like movies like Gravity,
Yeah.
that was great. You know, it was not perfect, but it was good enough that I really enjoyed Gravity. Stuff like that I can definitely get into, and I can appreciate that they tried, and I
Mhm.
can appreciate that. I can appreciate what went into that. And so when there's a movie like that where they worked hard to really try to get everything right,
Yeah.
and maybe there's a liberty taken just because it is a movie, and you have to take some liberties because it is a
Right.
movie, I'm okay with that.
Few years ago, I was down at a comic book convention or a pop culture convention in Houston, and they had a couple of astronauts from NASA were, appearing,
Mhm.
and I was able to, um, they, I do a Doctor Who podcast as well, so I had credentials, and so I was
Mhm.
interviewing people, and so I was talking to the astronaut, and I had just read The Martian, and I
Mhm.
said, I've just got to ask you, how how close is it? He said, it's so darn close. He
Mhm.
says, and
Yes.
he said, and the he says, I don't even want to give you a percentage of what's wrong, because the percentage that's not there is what it should be. Like, it's
Mhm.
close enough that you're like, I see what he was doing. He said, we are big fans of that novel, in NASA.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That was done so well. When I read The Martian, it was knowing that the movie was coming out
Right.
soon, and all I could think of is, oh my God, what are they going to cut from that? Because there's no way in translating the book to a movie that they were going to
Right.
really capture everything. You can't, because you just can't. You just don't have time in a movie to do that. So
Yeah.
all I could think was, oh my God, what wonderful stuff are they going to cut to make the movie work? And the movie
Mhm.
was okay. I still enjoyed the movie, definitely.
Yes.
But yeah, no, that book was fantastic. And his newer one, Project Hail Mary, if you have read The Martian and you haven't yet read Project Hail Mary, you're gonna love Project Hail Mary.
Y-
Everyone loves it.
Yeah, it is just truly amazing, and a unique perspective,
Hmm.
and a unique concept of the sun's dying. What do we do? You know,
Yes.
and and the idea of, there is that, not spoilerish, but to say, hey, when we weren't even trying to have global warming, we were able to do
Hmm.
it. What do you think we can do if we haven't run our mind on it?
Right. Right.
Is just fascinating.
Yeah. So again, to dance around, to not do a
Yeah.
spoiler, but my favorite stuff is what the other interesting characters in the book.
Yes.
I'm like,
Yes.
that was amazing. That was truly amazing.
Yeah, and the way you pay it off, and
Hmm.
you I remember in an interview with Andy Weir, he said, yes, it luckily in The Martian, I made my character a botanist, so
Hmm.
therefore, he could grow the potatoes, right?
Right.
He says, okay, fine, you want to pick at me, fine, but I had to have an angle to make
Hmm.
the story work. On this, you the way there is communication done, that um, it's believable and it's
Hmm.
interesting. I also I also like the hero's journey that our main character is in.
Hmm.
There, you wouldn't think that was it, and you get there's without spoiling, but um, our hero wakes up and doesn't know anything, and that's explained later in the book, but he is on a journey. He is on a journey of not just trying to save Earth, but also a journey of
Hmm.
himself. And I think that was really fun and creative. It made for a good story.
Hmm.
And I love the ending. I love the idea that we're doing that. So I totally agree with you.
Yeah, it was a great book.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm going to go back just for music, or
Hmm.
and talk as a parent. What how are you what kind of music are you exposing the kids to, and what kind of love of science and love of reading are you doing? It sounds like they're both pretty young, but
Hmm.
what's your thoughts on that?
So I have an 11-year-old and a 3-year-old.
Okay.
So we're at different stages with both of them. So when my 11-year-old was 3, when he was young, my original take on music was we were just going to listen to my music, or at least
Okay.
my music that's clean.
Sure.
Because I used to listen to Sublime and some other bands that, I'm not going to play for my young child, but we would listen to the Beatles, we would listen to classic rock, we would listen to still my stuff. And I don't think any of that has rubbed off on him.
Okay, good.
Although there are some modern groups that I think we all in the household generally enjoy. I think we all like Imagine Dragons. My son is listening to AJR, and
Okay.
I'm okay with that. I can,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm fine. But he's definitely at this point on his own, journey. But it is funny because we have like a Google Mini, so we can call up whatever we want. And so we have not arguments, but I'll start something and he'll say, Google, skip. We'll be in the car and I have my playlist on and he'll like, again, be Google, skip,
Yeah.
and we have, we have that. So yeah. So and that's kind of normal. I guess, normal stuff for parents and kids to go
Well,
through.
I love this. Penn Jillette from Penn and Teller tells the story that he is happy that his kids don't like classic rock
Mhm.
because he said the whole purpose of rock and roll is your parents should hate it. And so I don't want my kids while listening to the Rolling Stones.
Mhm.
I want them to be unhappy that I'm playing Bob Dylan, because that's the idea.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Then my other favorite story is Chris is my son, and he um, was going through a Metallica phase, but also an Eminem phase.
Mhm.
And so, Linda, my wife, listened, had the Eminem CD and was so appalled by it that, she took it out of the CD player and threw it out the window. And Chris is like, that wasn't my CD. That was my friend's CD.
That's funny.
And one of my best friends at work says, I've heard your wife. She does not have a Walmart official vocabulary. Like Walmart would not approve your wife's
Mhm.
vocabulary. I find it a little ironic that she's offended by, but it wasn't so much the curse words, it was the themes that she was
Mhm.
on.
Yeah.
She has now has learned to embrace some of that, but it is interesting that what you do. And
Well, yeah.
yeah.
My child doesn't know anything about Frank Zappa, and it's going to be a while before
Yes.
he listens to it. In fact, it took me a while actually. When I first heard Frank Zappa,
Yeah.
I was offended because that's what I thought I needed to be.
Yeah.
But then when I really learned about him and behind the music, that's kind of what turned me around on that. But
Yeah.
yeah, my son is way too young for that. But something that does skirt the edge there, and actually that we do both enjoy. We became humongous fans of Hamilton.
Yes.
And so, even though, I moved out of New York a long time ago, and with that, I'm not exposed to as much Broadway stuff as I felt like I was growing up. But, Hamilton did come here to my house and I became a complete American, history, like Revolutionary War history buff because of it. And we will listen to it. And there's some inappropriate words, which
Yes.
my son, he's at that age where it's funny and he's like, oh my God, they said that, so
Yeah.
it's fine. He understands. And even some of the things that they're singing about, he I think knows a couple, but doesn't know
Yeah.
all of them yet.
Mhm.
But we both, we definitely enjoy that together. Yeah.
So I was Brent Spiner was at a convention here in Dallas,
Mhm.
and I have a good friend named Tom Zoller who is an artist, and he does Love and Capes, and he's written My Little Pony stories, um, and so one of the things we have done over the years is I will send a sketchbook to Tom, and Tom will do a caricature of an actor who's going to be at a convention.
Mhm.
And then instead of buying an 8x10, picture that I just throw in a folder, I have a scrapbook. And so he did Brent as John Hancock from,
Mhm.
because he was in 1776. He did the revival. And so I'm standing in line and I give this to Brent, and He's like, oh my God, I love this. He said, this
Mhm.
is amazing. What thought of this? And I told him, I said, well, my friend Tom, we always try to figure out something like the three actresses that were in Bird of Prey, the the WB show.
Mhm.
He drew all three of them as characters, and he had them Barbie dolls, action figures of their characters. So they
Mhm.
had them all three at the table with the characters, and they were at a convention at Dragon Con, and they loved it. So anyway, Brent's like, well, would he do a sketch for me? And I said, I'm sure he would. And so I told him how much I loved 1776. And he said, have you seen Hamilton?
Mhm.
Like, no, no. He says, okay, go buy the CD. He said, because it's going to end up touring
Mhm.
and you're going to see it and you're going to love it. He said, if you love 1776, you are going to love Hamilton. So I did buy the CD and I listened to it a little bit. And then when it came out on, I guess Disney, right?
Mhm.
Or
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I watched it and I was like, I really enjoyed it. And then I told my wife, I said, I think you will like this. I said, I think if we put, I said, closed captioning helps because
Mhm.
they talk fast, they
Mhm.
speak
Yes.
fast. And she was captivated. She was like, this has been, she goes, I understand every storyline. I understand the music is amazing. It was
Mhm.
everything. So yeah, I think that's funny that great art can run through
Mhm.
the different generations.
Yes, and yeah, it was completely amazing. And when it came out on Disney Plus last year, and watched it, so I have been to my share of Broadway shows growing up. That was a
Yeah.
thing to do, and I just, this is how I want to watch it.
Yeah.
Seeing it where you really are seeing them close up and in that way. That's how I want to watch Broadway
Yeah.
musicals from now on. I want to see it like that.
And just to put this story just to bed, just because you will be one of the few people that understand this. So we're going to New York for the first time, and I go to TKTS to get tickets, and they had Chicago
Mhm.
tickets, and we're like, this was before the movie had come out, and so we're like, okay. And the big deal was George Hamilton was playing the lawyer. That was
Mhm.
the big star, and we're like, well, I've heard this is a really good play. Let's get it. So Nana Visitor was playing Voxy.
Nice.
And so
Awesome.
I was like, look, Linda. And Linda's like, has no idea because she's never watched Deep Space Nine. She has no idea.
Mhm.
I'm like, you don't understand, Linda. This is, oh my goodness. And so once again at Dragon Con, she was there. And I stood in line and I said,
Mhm.
I need to tell you this story. And she goes, what? And I said, like, I saw you on Broadway. Oh, you did? Yeah. She goes,
Mhm.
oh, I had so much fun. I go, yeah. And I said, and so you will always be my Roxy. And she goes, oh,
Aw,
that's one of the best compliments I've ever had. So
awesome.
yeah. So I was just this whole little, the inner Star Trek geek in me was
Mhm.
going, look, it's Major Kira. It's Major Kira. So,
That's
um,
fantastic.
all right. So, uh, Adiana, what should I have asked you that I haven't, as we've talked over an hour?
So what I was wondering if you were going to ask me what my actual favorite Bruce Springsteen song is, even though I know my answer is completely ridiculous.
No, not at all. Please, let's talk a little Bruce.
I don't know if anyone has ever told you this before, and is this going to sound completely ridiculous, but it's absolutely true. The Santa Claus is Coming to Town song.
So the reason I'm laughing is I do another podcast called How Many,
Mhm.
and it's basically an excuse for me and three or four of my friends to get together, and we pick a um like how many um Frank Zappa, how many good songs does Frank Zappa
Mhm.
have? And so we would talk about, and then, or Queen, how many,
Mhm.
like, here is this, or you know uh how many, will Spike Lee films that he's directed would you say are actually good? So we
Mhm.
debate this pop culture. And so, and Junior is one of the hosts, and he'll like, he'll mention Iron Maiden. Okay, well, they've got 13. Like he just picks a number right offhand. And he always says to Bruce Springsteen, so what does he do after he comes on stage, does Santa Claus is Coming to Town? What does he play next? Right. Like, I guess he can do Dancing in the Dark, but then, what else is he going to do? So every time, and I have a couple of listeners who'll say, oh yeah, Junior's favorite Bruce Springsteen song is Santa Claus is Coming to Town. So yes, absolutely.
I mean, it's been there my entire life.
Yes.
Literally. So I think I recently learned that particular recording, the iconic recording that we hear every year, was done in 1975. And
yes.
So literally my entire life that's been there. And when Christmas time comes around, when the holidays come around, I really just want those same like dozen or two songs that I listened to growing up. That's all I want. I don't want the new. I don't want anything new. I just want those old ones.
So to me, and I grew up my dad was in the Army. We moved around a lot, but by the time I was, a freshman, we were living in Lake Charles, Louisiana. And the Please Come Home for Christmas by Charles Brown wasn't Christmas till December 1st, and the local AM station, ding, 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 bells will be ringing. That's when it was Christmas. Right. So there are things where you hear, oh, Clarence, you're going to get a new saxophone. I mean, and I want that beginning. I want that whole story. So absolutely, that's a great choice. That is good. So, all right. Before I let you go, and thank you, you've been so kind with your time. I have to ask you the Mary question. So, for those of you who are listening to this podcast because you either work with Adeena or you are fans of her novel, you're probably going, what's the Mary question? Well, Jay Armstrong is an honors English teacher from the Philadelphia area. He just recently retired. And every year, he would have his seniors in high school spend 2 days breaking apart the song Thunder Road by Bruce Springsteen. They go through all the lyrics, they look at the imagery, they talk about the themes that he's exploring, and then they compare it to Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken, and other American poems and English poems. And then at the end of the 2 days, Jay asks the question to his class, does Mary get in the car? So your homework was listen to Thunder Road and come up with the answer. So does Mary get in the car?
So I listened to the song many, many times. It's a really great song. So it's wonderful to listen to. And I read the lyrics, and if you go on YouTube, you can, watch the lyrics play with the song, which I feel is a great way to do this.
Absolutely.
The interesting thing for me when I think about this is we're being told this story through Bruce's perspective, not through Mary's perspective. We only know Mary through Bruce and through not just what he sees, but what he's telling us or what he wants to see. So the question I have is he seeing Mary, or is he seeing the Mary he wants to see? If he's seeing the Mary he wants to see, she goes with him because it's all what he wants. Yes. It's not necessarily what she wants or who she is. But because so that's it. So if it is him, she goes. If not, then I don't know, because I don't know how to know, because I don't know how to know Mary.
Yeah.
Because I don't know Mary.
No, I think that's a great answer. So first off, I will send you a couple of links. There was a guy a couple of years ago, I cannot think of his name, but he wrote a column, Thunder Road from Mary's perspective. And and it's like here he is bragging about his car again, like that piece of junk, and as if I didn't know he's
right
with me with Rosalita. So anyway, there is, and I had a friend of mine, I asked his permission and he said absolutely. So I I took Thunder Road and I spliced my friend reading this column
Mhm.
into it. So it's Mary's answer to Thunder Road. So I will send you that just so you get the perspective. It's
Awesome.
hilarious. Um,
It is when you put when you change perspective, it's amazing how things change. There was that movie a couple years ago, Passengers, with Chris
yes.
Pratt in it.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed the movie. And then I saw some YouTube channel where they're talking about it, and I hadn't thought about this, but they mentioned, well, imagine the movie from the girl's perspective. She wakes up to this, like, basically this complete lunatic and everything, and that completely like undid the movie for me.
Yeah.
I wasn't prepared to really think about that movie in that different way. But ever
Yeah.
since then, yes, like, yeah, perspective is everything.
So I have another, I had another podcast host that had never heard the song.
Mhm.
And she did not listen to the song. She just read the lyrics.
Mm.
And she sent me that, no, it's a murder. Like if she gets in the car, he's going to kill her.
That's really funny because just a little while ago, before we got on the phone here, I was
Yeah.
out the store with my older son. So he's
Yes.
11. So we're in the car, and it came because I had it in my playlist. It came on.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, 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 no. We have to listen to this because I have to answer the question. Like, does she get in the car with him? And he didn't really hear many of the lyrics, but his just reaction when I said, does she get in the car with him, was like, he was like, no, that's weird. He's a weirdo. he doesn't know anything about Bruce Springsteen, the lyrics,
Yeah.
anything. His reaction to
Yeah.
someone getting in the car with someone else is, no, that's
Yeah.
weird.
So I have a couple of answers that I love. One of them is and if you're heavy into Springsteen, Racing in the Street has this line where he talks about his wife sits on the porch of her dad, sits on her daddy's porch, and they
Mhm.
go, oh, that's Mary because she was dancing on the porch. But truly, one of my favorite answers was a guy said it depends. If it's the E Street Band doing it,
Mhm.
absolutely she gets in the car because it ends with the triumphant music.
Mhm.
But if it's Bruce doing it solo, no, she doesn't get in the car
Ah,
because
interesting.
he's sad and inner. So yeah.
Mhm.
So I will send you a couple links of that.
Okay,
I cannot wait to read your novel. Promise me when the second one comes out, you'll come me and we can promote it.
absolutely.
And we will, I don't know, maybe we'll do a wrap up of Lower Decks or something because this was too much fun.
Sure. No, happy to
Yeah.
do that.
If someone wants to reach you, how can they?
The best way is to find me on Twitter initially. And it's my Twitter handle is my first name, Adeena.
Okay.
And from there, you can find my website, which, my last name is harder to spell or remember. So
Okay.
find me on Twitter, and then you can find me anywhere.
Okay, sounds good. I will do this. I absolutely just have loved talking to you. It's been so much
This
fun.
has been fun. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you had a good time. Listeners, go check out Crazy Foolish Robots. And check out the book. It is next on my to read list, and I am thrilled. I may have you back on just to go, hey, I just want to
Sure.
talk about the book. So please believe in science, go get vaccinated.
Yes.
Go till you're vaccinated, or even after you're vaccinated, you can still wear your mask.
Yep.
You can still social distance. You can still wash your hands. We got to get back to normal. And the only way we're going to do that is by being good to each other.
Yes.
So please take care of that. If you have any, reach out, let me know if you have any questions. For now, take care. We will talk to you soon. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Doing a podcast at times can be a one-way conversation, and I hate that. So please let me know what you like and don't like about the work I'm doing. You can reach the podcast via email at setlustingbruce@gmail.com. The show is on Twitter at setlustingbruce, and my personal Twitter is at jessejacksondfw. We have a website, www.setlustingbruce.com. From there, you can find links to other Springsteen podcasts as well as other music-themed podcasts. We have a page devoted to our own SLB All-Star Band. These are guests who have been on the podcast more than 3 times. There is a link to our store where you can purchase Set Lusting Bruce shirts as well as a Mary Question t-shirt. There is a link to our Patreon page where you can sign up to help support the podcast financially. We have different levels and different rewards based on your support. If you don't have any extra cash, and right now, who does? You can support the podcast by subscribing via your favorite podcast player and leaving us a review. The more reviews we have, the easier it is for people to find us. And please tell a friend about the podcast, especially if they love Bruce or music, because it will make a difference.
You just heard the fun talking, hard rocking, music loving, album ranking, fan thinking, joy spreading, lyric reading, story sharing podcast that is the one, the only Set Listing Bruce. The theme for Set Listing Bruce was written by David Rosen, used by permission.